In this video, I am going to teach you 64 different endgames that you need to know, and after watching this video, you will be in the top 1% of chess players when it comes down to endgame knowledge. This is going to be a very long video, so if you think that you won't be able to watch it in one go, make sure to subscribe and save this video somewhere so that you can come back to it later, because it is really important for you to watch the entire video. So I am going to start by teaching the very basics. This will only take a couple of minutes, and then I will go into more advanced endgames. But it is very important that you start from the basics, because you are going to quickly realize that it is the understanding of the basics that is going to help you in more complex endgame positions. All right. So very simple. This will be very brief. First of all, we need to understand what pieces can actually deliver a checkmate. And it is only by understanding this that we know which endgames are going to be winnable. So first of all, two queens, of course, can deliver a checkmate because we can simply do the staircase pattern, which means that we can use both queens next to each other, and we are building a staircase. We keep moving them up the board, and the more we move them up the board, the more ranks that we take away from the opponent. And eventually, the opponent is going to end up on the back rank, the final rank, and then the two queens are going to deliver a checkmate. I think this is very basic, but this is a very important principle, which shows us that the king is more likely to get checkmated if it is on the edge of the board, and that's a very common theme. So this is our first checkmate. If we have two rooks, it is very similar. We can also do a ladder checkmate, and we can do a ladder checkmate in multiple ways. We could start by cutting off these ranks and then build towards the other side of the board and checkmate them this way, or we could also cut them off so that they are stuck on the left, and then we are going to checkmate them that way. And this is a very typical pattern as well. This is also called building a box, building a cage for the king. We are building a cage in which the enemy king is going to be stuck, and the smaller the cage, the better. So the king would have to move. We want to do the same pattern. We want to move these rooks side by side. But of course, with the rooks, we do have to watch out, because if we just play the move rook to b2, the king is going to take the rook. The game is not lost yet. White can still win this, but of course the rooks don't defend each other like the queens do. So when the king gets closer to your rooks, a very important rule to remember is that you should just move your rooks as far away as you can. For example, move the rook to d8. And then we want to move the other rook up the board as well. Important, you always want to have your rooks next to each other diagonally, like this. What I see so many players do is they play this move. But this move is not going to help you win the game, because if we check, the king jumps in between the rooks. And then if we check, suddenly the king is running to the other side of the board. That's not what we want. We always need to keep our cage. So instead we need to go to c7, this square here, so that we are diagonally connected with the other rook. And that way we can use both of them to build the staircase, and then eventually here deliver another checkmate, because the king is attacked, and again the king is stuck and it cannot go anywhere. All right, that was our second one. Now we are going to look at how to deliver a checkmate if you don't have two pieces left. What if you only have one single queen left? Well, if you have a single queen, there is actually a very simple strategy that I recommend following to deliver a checkmate, which is that you want to build a box. You want to build a cage around the enemy king. And this cage will be ever shrinking up to the moment where the opponent only has two available moves, and then we are going to bring in our king and deliver a checkmate with the queen. The simplest way to remember this, it's not going to be the fastest checkmate, but it's going to be the simplest one that I also still use, is that you always want to put your queen at a knight distance away from the enemy king. As long as we are at a knight distance away, we will be creating a shrinking box. So they move, we go knight distance from the king. They move, knight distance. And sometimes they can also move the other way around, but it's still the same. Knight distance away from the enemy king. That's basically what we keep doing. And if we keep doing this, eventually they will get cornered, which could look like this. This is the position we would want. And now their king is basically stuck in between these two squares. All they have is they have these two squares. They have to go up and down. And it is very important to remember that once the king is in the corner, we don't want to go knight distance away from them anymore. Because if we go knight distance right now, this would be a stalemate, a position where it is black to move, and the black king has no legal moves. Every square is attacked by the queen. So the king has no moves, but the king is also not in a check. So this is not a win. This is going to be a draw, as black doesn't have legal moves. So the moment that you see that they only have two squares, that is the moment you have to bring up your king. And we will be able to deliver a checkmate. I will just quickly show you what that can look like. This is also called the Queen's Kiss checkmate, because basically the queen is going to stand next to the enemy king. Imagine the queen giving a kiss to the enemy king, a deadly kiss, because it's also attacking every single square around the king. And of course, our queen is protected by our own king, which means that they are in checkmate this time, and we win the game. Now we are going to have a look at how to checkmate using the king and the rook. So the principle is very similar to what we looked at before when we tried to checkmate with the queen. And the principle that I am talking about is building this box or building this cage, trying to limit the moves that the enemy king has. That's really the main plan. So for example, rook to a4, building this cage. The only downside with the rook is that the rook can get attacked by the enemy king. And when we get attacked, we will need to move, or we will need to support it with the king. But the king is very far away, so we are not going to be able to do that right here. We will need to move the rook. We don't necessarily need to go all the way over here, but I just want to teach you simply how you need to do this. Basically, we need to start using our king. If we don't activate our king, this is never going to work out. So black tries to get closer, and now we can finally build that box. We can build that cage, because now our rook is protected by the king. And this is what we are going to keep doing. We want to keep shrinking this box. So we keep moving the rook so that we build an ever-shrinking rectangle in which the enemy king will be stuck. The only thing we need to watch out for, of course, is that you don't move the rook when it's not protected by the king, because then you are going to lose your rook, and this is now a draw, and that would be very, very horrible. So at some moment, you are going to have a position where you cannot move your rook anymore because you would lose it. That is the moment where we should use our king. We move the king closer. If black is trying to be tricky, they will move closer again as well, because if we continue building the box, while they will be escaping on the other side. And this is where I see most beginners get stuck with this strategy, which is that they allow the enemy king to escape. So instead of doing that, we would need to move the king again. Just keep the box that we already have, and then if they move sideways, we can start shrinking it again. Or if they move up the board, we can also just go in with the king and make the box shrink that way. So we can also use our king and then put the rook up as well. But I'm going to explain it this way. So we shrink the box again, and we achieved what we always wanted, which is that the enemy is on the back rank here. Again, don't play this move, because if you play this move, then, well, we are simply going to get them to take a rook, and that's not going to be great. So as soon as they are on the back rank, we can start thinking about checkmate. For a checkmate to happen, we will need to get the two kings facing off with each other, and then the rook basically delivering some type of back rank checkmate. That is what we want to achieve. There are many different ways to achieve this. I'm not necessarily going to show you the fastest one. I just wanted to show you an easy one. So many things we could do. For example, we could think about bringing the king up closer here, because one of our steps is that we want to get the kings facing off with each other. And what we would like to achieve as our final position would be this: a position where the kings are facing off with each other, which means that we are stopping them from going to any of these squares, and then the rook can deliver a checkmate. That is basically the goal that we have. The rook is going to check the king and then take away this rank, while the other king is basically taking away this rank. And that is how we can deliver a checkmate. So this would be in this position the fastest way to do it. But I'm going to show you a worse way to do it, which would be playing king to c5. Why is it worse? Because while we are giving them some wiggling room, we are giving them some maneuvering room here with the king, and we are wasting some time. But if this happens, don't worry, we are still going to be able to do a checkmate. What we can basically do is we can move the rook somewhere. Let's say we move the rook down here, okay. If the enemy king goes up, what we can simply do is move the rook up one square. And the thing is that they cannot move backwards, because if they move backwards, we will be able to deliver a checkmate to them. So they need to go up the board. And when they go up the board, we are going to follow them. Again, they cannot go backwards. That's the checkmating position. They go up the board again. We go up as well, but they are stuck. They can no longer go up the board. They would need to go down. And once they go down, that is going to be a checkmate as well. So this is how you checkmate with king and rook. A very interesting one. We already briefly covered this, but I just wanted to cover this again, that we have to be careful for stalemate always in these positions. For example, king goes to the corner. You would be surprised how many people I would see that play the move queen to b6, taking away all of the squares and delivering a stalemate. So remember, we have the queen kiss checkmate. We also have this checkmate. It's similar to the queen kiss. It's diagonally and it's also supported. And what you can also do with a queen oftentimes is try to deliver a back rank checkmate, just like we would do with a rook. Basically works the exact same way. So just make sure that you don't stalemate. If you have two knights, you can never deliver a checkmate if this is all the material that's on the board. If they still have a pawn or something, yes, it's possible. But basically two knights, there's nothing we can do. Just remember this. If you have two knights, or if you have an endgame that's going to turn into a two knights endgame, there is no checkmate. If you have two bishops, there is a possibility for checkmate. I won't explain the entire technique. But basically, the way that we can deliver a checkmate is that we are going to get the king to the corner. This is very rare. You are almost never going to need to do this. But if you want, there are some exercises available on Lichess where you can practice this more in depth. Another one is bishop and knight. This can also checkmate. I'm also not going to teach you exactly how to do it, but just remember this can deliver a checkmate. These two working together can take away squares from the king and then deliver a checkmate. Why am I not going super in depth for those endgames? Because the bishop and knight, or the double bishop endgame, those are very, very rare endgames. And I think for most people, it's more important to study all of the other ones first because they are way more common. But it is good to realize that there is a checkmate with those pieces, so that if you are forced into it, at least you know that you will still have a checkmating opportunity. Then we also have a lot of endgames that you can get. This is way more common, where you are going to have a queen and they are going to have a piece left. That piece could be a bishop, a knight, a rook, a pawn, that we are also going to look into that later. And you also need to know how to deliver a checkmate in those positions. Basically, a bishop versus queen is pretty simple because their bishop can only control one color. And as long as we don't put anything on that color, we will be able to just do our queen and king checkmates that we would otherwise do. So what I am talking about is that we want to build an ever shrinking box as usual. And in these positions, I like also using my king very early. So not much we need to do. We can give checks, but then they can just block with the bishop. So the checks actually don't make that much sense. What we need to do is just use the king and the queen. Use the king and the queen, and we can get to a point where they would have to abandon their bishop, and we can win it. Or we could sometimes also get to a point where we are going to checkmate them regardless of the fact that they have a bishop. So you will see if you practice this, this is not really that difficult because it's basically just king and queen moving up the board, trying to corner the king. And my advice is just to keep your pieces on light colors because the only way that you could really mess this up, I'm going to try to see if I can simulate messing this up. Well, it's very hard to simulate messing it up. Let me see how I'm just going to see if I can do it. Let's see. Let's make king move. I know we can take the bishop, but let's not do it. This is how you would mess it up. This is the only way you would mess it up, which is that you put your king and queen on the same diagonal, either this way so that it gets pinned, or the other way around, so that your king gets attacked and you lose your queen. So as long as you don't put them on the same diagonal, you are not going to be in trouble. Just keep them on the opposite color squares. Playing against a knight is more annoying, especially if you are low on time, since a knight can give you many checks, and there's always that threat of a fork happening. So here it's more complicated to win this. The main strategy is the same, which is that we want to use the queen to build a box, and then we just want to move the king up as much as we can to try to get closer, also sometimes to threaten to win the knight. But be careful when you do this. Every single time you are thinking about making a move, you need to make sure that the knight cannot fork you. There are a couple of simple tricks you can use to avoid this. For example, if a piece is right next to the knight, up or down, so on one of these squares, the knight can never attack it. So if you always have one of your pieces there, like we did with the queen here, I know that there is no fork. And if we have one square diagonally between the king and the knight, then I also know that the knight cannot attack my king. If there is one square diagonally, then there will always be an opportunity for them to do a check. But as long as it's not a fork, that's not a problem. It is normal that this knight can check you a couple of times, but we do need to watch out, of course. As you see, you don't want to get into a position where you start repeating. So sometimes you might just need to go back with your king, give another check with the queen, and then go up again. And we just basically keep doing this. We keep getting closer with the king and the queen. You need to be patient. Sometimes you need to go the other way around, and then eventually we try to get the king to the back rank. It's very similar. We try to get the king to the back rank. Sometimes you will also be able to pin the knight, making knight moves impossible. Move closer with the king, and now we are going to have our checkmate. If we play queen to e7, that is the queen kiss checkmate. If they go here, we checkmate them as well. And I don't know if they move the knight to give us a check. The game will last a little bit longer, but eventually we are going to get to this position, and we will also be able to do a checkmate. So the main thing to remember here is use both the king and queen together. Very important. And watch out for those forks. If you get forked, it's game over. So that's very important. All right. Now we are going to start with the actual meat of the video, like the actual more difficult part of the video, which is going to be all of the different endgames where we are going to need to use a pawn to promote. Why did I start with the other endgames first? Because with this video, you are going to recognize that things are going to get more and more difficult over time. But as long as you understand the previous step, you should be able to follow along with the next step. And if we don't know how to deliver a checkmate with like a queen or a rook, then there is no point in learning how to make a queen with your pawn, because you don't know how to checkmate with it, or you might do a stalemate. So very important that we learn these things in order. All right, now we are going to have a look at king and king, basically two kings with one pawn in between, which is also called a king and pawn endgame. And this is where we are going to need to use our first fancy chess term, which is going to be the opposition. The opposition, that is something you might have heard before, and I will explain to you how that works. In king and pawn endgames, the opposition is very important. What do we mean with opposition? We have the opposition when we can force the opponents to make a move, and very soon we are going to see an example of this. Before I give that example, I want to explain something more easy about king and pawn endgames, which is that if you have your king behind your pawn, which is what most beginners do, your king behind your pawn, that's not good. You want your king in front of your pawn. Otherwise, you won't be able to win this endgame. So right here, our king is behind our pawn. It does not matter who has the move, if it's white, if it's black, who has the opposition. We will talk in a moment about that in more detail. Basically, there is nothing we can do. Because, well, if we push the pawn, of course, we lose the pawn. So we need to go in with the king. And there is a very simple trick that the defender can use to get a draw in these positions. They just go stand in front of our king. making it impossible for us to make progress. And if we check with the pawn, they are just going to stand in front of the pawn again. And in this position, the best thing for them to do, the habit that they should learn, is always just going back one square. This is a flexible move for black, because they are just waiting to see which side we are going to try to use. And then if we pick a side, they can go stand in front of us again, taking away options, forcing us to push the pawn, and then we get this position. And this happens over and over again, and it is here at the final moment where it is really crucial for black to play the move king to d8. Look at where white's going to go, then challenge us. If we push the pawn, they stand in front of it again, and if we move here, as we have done 3 times already, this is going to be a stalemate situation again. Because this king has no squares. Both the pawn and our king are taking away all of the squares, but the king is also not in check. So this is how most endgames can end up as a draw if you have one extra pawn, which is that you don't play this correctly. So this is the very first thing to understand. As we have seen, if you have your king behind your pawn, you won't be able to win the game. So as the defender, it's important to know this technique as well. Try to keep your king in front of their pawn and then use this technique that we just covered. All right. Now we are going to have a look at what to actually do, which is that we want to have our king in front of our pawn. That is what we really want to do. But if we have our king in front of our pawn, that's not yet a guarantee that we are going to win the game. Now this is going to come down to the opposition. Now it's finally time to explain this. What is the opposition? Well, it depends on who has the move. In this position, black has the opposition. What do we mean with that? Black is shielding us, blocking us from going forward, which means that they have the opposition. They are blocking us. They force us to make a move and we cannot make progress. So black has the opposition when black doesn't need to make a move and they are standing in front of us. So this position is a very important one to remember. If you have 2 kings with 1 square in between, the side that doesn't need to make a move, which is black doesn't need to move here as it's white to move in this position. The side that doesn't need to make a move is the side that has the opposition, that has the advantage basically, because they can achieve what they want to achieve. So they can force us to go sideways, but it's very important that black tries to keep the opposition. And this is something that you will really need to learn. And this is something simple if you understand it, but most people just learn it way too late. Black needs to again take the opposition. What do they need to do? There's only one move. They need to go stand in front of our king again, shielding these squares, creating that same position again. Because if they do anything else, let's say they move backwards or they move sideways, they are going to end up losing. Let's say they go backwards. Then we can stand in front of them with 1 square in between. We can create this barrier, and now it is black to move. So that means white has the opposition. So now we would be winning. So what do you need to remember for this position? That as white, you want to have it to be black to move. If it's black to move in this position, we can win. If it's white to move, it's going to be a draw as long as black keeps standing in front of our king. And basically, we cannot make any progress. I mean, if we go all the way here, they are just going to come closer. And if we go back and forth, that's not going to help as well. So this will usually lead to frustration and white eventually starting to push his pawn. But now that we have pushed our pawn, we have that situation that we just looked at, which is that we don't have our king in front of our pawn. And we are going to see the exact same sequence from before. So they stand in front of the pawn, they step back. They follow us, they stand in front of the pawn, they step back. They follow us, they stand in front of the pawn, and it's a draw because it's a stalemate again. So very important. And king and pawn endgames, this opposition is what you need to understand. And we are going to cover it many, many times during this video. This position is the exact same as what we just looked at, but there's actually one huge difference. It is black to move. And if it is black to move, who has the opposition? Remember, we have 2 kings, 1 square in between. which means that we are creating this barrier, and it is black to move. So since it is black to move, that means white has the opposition, because black needs to make a move and they don't want to make a move. They would like to just stand there and block us. And now we are going to look at the technique which is called flanking. So we need to make progress, which we can do by moving diagonally. We are flanking them. They made this flank weak by choosing that side, so we are moving here. If they had moved that way, we would flank them here. We would go to via that side, basically. So we are flanking them, all right. But very important with this flanking technique is that we also keep grabbing the opposition. If we get careless and we make a pawn move, no, we won't be winning this anymore. We need the king to lead. Remember this. The king needs to lead. The king needs to be in front. So what do? We just simply grab the opposition again. We create this barrier. We make it so that they have to make a move. And now we can flank them again. We can flank them. And we can basically keep repeating this for a while. And by repeating this, we are making progress. I mean, if they go to the back rank, it's easy, but they might always go up as well, closer towards our pawn. And now this is simply going to be winning, because now we can start pushing our pawn. And our king and pawn are actually creating this barrier that the opponent's king cannot move through. So they have to go up. The crucial thing to remember here is that we are going to be winning anyways. But you don't want to go here. And the reason why we don't want to go here, it's not going to lose you the game, is that they just go up again. And we cannot actually move the pawn. So we would need to move the pawn. They go here, but again, we grab the opposition. We force them away, and now it's time for our final flanking maneuver. We flank, and this is really what you always want to achieve. Our king is basically clearing the way, protecting every single square where the pawn needs to go, so we can just push, push, and checkmate. And how to finish this game, you should already know that, because we covered that at the beginning. That's why I started with those basic examples. So now this is winning. Of course, if you make a rook, it's also going to be winning, but it's going to take longer to checkmate. All right, here we have another position. And this is very similar to what we just looked at, but the difference is that I shifted the kings up one square, and we have this position. All right, so what's going on here? Well, in this position, it actually does not matter who has the opposition. And what I mean with this is that it is white to move here. So if it was white to move and this was the position, we cannot win that because black has the opposition. Here it is white to move, but what we can do is we can waste the move. We can push the pawn to pass the move back to the opponent, and that will give us the opposition. What does this mean? Well, we are creating this barrier and it's their turn. So now they need to make a move, and we can start this whole flanking, coming closer maneuver, clearing the way for the pawn. Sometimes if you don't play it correctly, you might see the king rushing to the pawn. Just go back with your own king, and then eventually we will have exactly what we just did, which is this maneuver. So why is this example important? So that you realize it's actually beneficial for you to have a bit of space between your king and the pawn. Because if you have space between your king and the pawn, then you can just make a pawn move, waste the tempo, waste the move basically, pass the turn to the opponent, and then get to the position that we have already covered. All right. I hope that this is clear to you and that now you understand the basic king and pawn endgame, because that is really going to be the foundation of most of this lesson. If you feel like this was difficult, maybe rewatch it, and you can also make some exercises by yourself to solve this. I feel like especially Lichess has many good endgame exercises. I will leave the link actually here below this video so that you can go practice them as well in case you want some practice before you continue. Now we need to talk about something very special, which is the rook pawn. What do I mean when I say rook pawn? A rook pawn is a pawn on the edge of the board. The file where the rook starts. So the H file or the A file, those pawns are rook pawns. And if there is one thing that I want you to remember about rook pawns, it is that having a rook pawn increases the chances of the position ending in a draw. Because a lot of endgames, which are usually winnable, are not winnable if you have a rook pawn. So if this was a central pawn or a bishop pawn or a knight pawn, the things that we looked at before, you could actually win this game. But if it is a rook pawn, it's going to be a draw. Why is this important? If you are in the middle game and you need to make some trading choices and you need to choose which file your pawn is going to end up, please don't make your pawn end on the H file, because then you might have more chances of a draw in the endgame. Why is this a draw? Well, it's a draw because the enemy king can try to stay in the corner. If they stay in the corner and we go here, that's just a stalemate. And the rook pawn leads to many stalemates because the rook pawn needs to promote in a corner. And since there is a corner, there is no file next to it. And since there is no file next to it, we cannot force the enemy king to move to the right because there is no right. And if they move to the left, well, and we make progress, then they just move back to the corner again. So just remember that rook pawns are very drawish. If the enemy king can get in front of the pawn, if they cannot get in front of the pawn, and if we can clearly shield them from achieving this position, from getting into the corner, then we will still be winning. And I think I have an example for that as well in a moment. So this is another way how they can try to secure a draw. This looks better because our king is in front of the pawn, but it's not better. We would actually need to have our king here and their king over there. That's what we would be winning. This is also a draw. Why is this a draw? Well, black goes here, and just look at this. What are we going to do? The pawn cannot move up, or king cannot move here. If we go here, well, that's very bad because we allow them to crawl into the corner, and if they get into the corner, there's no way we are winning that. So yeah, well, maybe we go in the corner then? But they just move up and we are pretty much stuck because, well, if we keep going back and forth, there is no progress. We cannot go here. And yeah, there's no way to make progress. And if we get frustrated and we move the pawn, then black is just going to play king f8. And this is also a draw. It's a draw because they are blocking every single legal move for us. We have no legal moves. So it's a draw. And this is the second way how you can get a draw with a rook pawn, which is that we do manage to get our king in front of the pawn, but we are actually in a corner. And by being in a corner, it is not winnable. Let me actually show you. I see I have no example for this, so you are going to get at least 65 examples then, how we could actually win this. This is winning. This is winning. Why is this winning? Because now we are creating this barrier so that the king cannot move forward. And if there is that barrier, well, then we are just simply going to move up the pawn and create a queen. So remember this. If you have this pawn that you want to promote into the corner, you want your king to be, for example, here or here or here, like somewhere on this file, so that we can shield those squares and then we can run the pawn up the board. We don't want to have the king in front of the pawn here because they are going to create this position. And usually this would be winning. This would usually be winning, but we don't have that file on the right side that we can go to. So because of that, this is also going to be a draw. Now we are going to have a look at endgames where there are multiple pawns on the board. And it is very important that you understand those basics that we just covered, because if you don't understand those basics, you will be lost on what to do here. So when there are multiple pawns on the board, we can pretty much still follow many of the same rules that we talked about. So these pawns that we have here, these are locked pawns, like these are locked, these cannot move, which basically means that currently everything revolves around this one extra pawn that we have. This passed pawn. A passed pawn is a name for a pawn that can be pushed to promotion. There is a very big rule you need to remember, which is PPP, push passed pawn. If you have a passed pawn and if you can push it, you should push it. Because the closer you get to that final square, the bigger the winning chances are going to be. And we need to be careful because this is a position we have seen before. What move should white definitely not play? King b6. If we play king b6, well, this is the stalemate that we have seen before. It still applies. So why is white winning if we cannot promote this pawn? Well, In an endgame with multiple pawns, the trick is to try to distract your opponent's king on the wrong side of the board and then just rush to their pawns. And if we are going to be the first to reach those pawns, we will be winning, because we can just grab these pawns. We could grab these pawns. We could also shield their king and just use this pawn to promote. We don't need to win all of them. But basically, as long as we can get our king closer to those pawns faster, we are going to be able to play for a winning endgame. There is, however, still one thing that we need to be careful with, for example, in this particular position. You always need to watch out for stalemate. If we promote to a queen, it's a draw. It's a draw, because the king has no squares. The king has no squares. All of the squares are taken up by these pieces. So we can actually not promote to a queen. Well, maybe we can promote to a rook, and then this is going to be a winning endgame. King has to go here, and there's actually rook to f6, which is a checkmate, as the king is completely boxed in. So very important to remember, when you have the passed pawn, we can use this, we can distract their king with it, and then we just go over, grab the pawns, grab one pawn or grab two pawns, and then we start pushing those pawns to promotion. That is how you win an endgame if you are up a pawn. This is another example of an endgame, but this time we both have two pawns. We both have two pawns. And this is a very interesting endgame, as things can really go wrong or right depending on what happens. Technically, this endgame should be a drawn endgame. We both have two pawns, and there's no way for anyone to win unless if the other player makes a mistake. And that mistake is exactly what I want to talk about here. All right. If we play the move g4, we instantly lose the game, because of something that is called frozen pawns. So that's what I want to explain to you. Frozen pawns. What do I mean with this? We allow the opponent to play g5, and after playing g5, they are taking away the option for us to play h4, because, well, if we still play h4, they would take, and they are only 3 squares away from promotion. So what we created is we created frozen pawns, and this is a very important position to remember. Frozen pawns can happen when one pawn is stopping two pawns. This one pawn is single-handedly stopping two pawns. We can no longer play h4 because, well, for example, here they would stop this pawn and then they would still be promoting. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do about this. So we won't win this game anymore. So remember that you don't want to freeze your pawns, especially that we have a 2 versus 1 situation. Well, that's something interesting that we can use to try to make progress. So the pawn that we have to move up first is this one, the h pawn. This makes that push impossible for them. And now we could even possibly win this. Let's say if black is really trying everything they can to just hold on to this pawn, we would be winning, because we are slowly making progress again by pushing this way. Don't push this way. You are again creating frozen pawns. You lose your winning opportunity. But if you push this way, take, well, 3 squares away from promotion, and the king is simply too slow, just one move too slow to catch us. So we would be winning this endgame. But I said at the beginning that this endgame was going to be a drawn endgame. Well, how is this a draw? Basically, black has to abandon this pawn and just rush over here. And as long as they do that, they will be able to secure a draw. But we still need to be careful. I mean, if we just let this king pick up both of these pawns for free, then they are going to have a king and a pawn left, and they are just going to push that to promotion, which would be horrible. We don't want that to happen. So we need to make sure that we can at least eliminate that pawn. There's only one sequence that does this, g4. And then h5. And it doesn't matter. I mean, if the king takes here, well, actually it does matter. Then we are winning. And if they take here, we take. The king goes closer, and they pick up the pawn. So look at this position. This looks so incredibly simple because it's just 2 pawns, but it's actually quite devious. White can win, black can win. It can be a draw, and there are multiple opportunities to mess this up. So if needed, put this on the board, practice this yourself, because this is a very important one to understand. The key takeaway, don't create frozen pawns. That's not what we want. Move the other pawn first and then move this one so that they can move up the board together. And as black here, if you see two pawns rushing up and there's only one defender, if white plays it well, you must know that they will always be able to promote. So your only option is just to rush over there and go stop that promotion, even if you need to abandon this pawn. Because holding on to the pawn doesn't help and white will just promote. All right. Next up is this position, which is very, very similar to what we have seen before. But I just wanted to show this one because this one is an exception to the rule. This is a king and pawn endgame. We have seen these before. So remember what was important? Opposition. Opposition is very important. This is actually a position where black has the opposition, because black just stepped in front of our king. They created this barrier and now we cannot make any progress. And even though that black has the opposition, white is still winning. And we are winning because we can get a pawn to the 6th rank. And that's the general rule. If you can get a pawn to the 6th rank, or of course the 7th rank works as well, then it doesn't matter anymore who has the opposition here and in this particular position. Because even if they step in front of the pawn, we push and yeah, they have to go sideways and we are making a queen. So there is an exception that if your pawn gets to the 6th rank, it doesn't matter. The reason why is because that black would like to step back, but they cannot step back as they are already on the back rank. So that's just a small example that I needed to show as well for these king and pawn endgames. All right, next one. Now we have something that a lot of people mess up. Even very strong players mess this one up. What's happening here? Well, we both have a king and there's a pawn here. Like, what do we do? Do we push the pawn? Do we move the king? And if we move the king, where are we going to move to? That's a very important question. Well, if we just push the pawn, that's not going to work because their king will be close enough. And I don't know if I teach the rule of the square in this lesson. Maybe I do. Then we will see this twice maybe, but there's a very simple way to know whether or not your opponent will be able to stop this. After we push, we have 3 squares left, 3 squares left, 3 squares left, 3 squares left. Let's just draw this rectangle. So that's how I do it. 3 squares, 3 squares, 3 squares, 3 squares. If the opponent's king can step into that rectangle, which they can, we are not promoting because they will just be in time to capture the queen. So no, pushing the pawn is not the right move. And as we have seen in general, we need to get the king in front of the pawn. That is the rule. So if we want to get the king in front of the pawn, does it matter what we do? Does it matter if we go here, 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 or here? Well, there's actually only one move that works, which is king to e2. The reason why is that we want to get in front of the pawn, and we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can get in front of the pawn this way. And we are also staying far away from the enemy king. If we try to do it this way, the position is going to be drawn, and that's what I wanted to show first. So if we want to do it this way, and we try to make progress, this king will be just in time to shield this, to grab the opposition, and this is again the draw that we have seen before, because if we push the pawn, there is no way that we are making progress. This is a bit of a more advanced example of flanking, as we have seen before. We want to use the flank, the side of the board where they have no presence. So we start moving this way, and this just gives us enough time to do the final move here, king to c5, throwing up some shield with the king by looking at these squares, and then we can grab the opposition. Of course, don't push the pawn because you are going to get that drawn endgame again. Grab the opposition, and then this is going to be an endgame that we can win. Just push the pawn, and then we are going to promote and deliver a checkmate. So if you have a position like this, think you want to get your king in front of the pawn, or at least shielding the pawn from the side, so that we can clear a path for promotion, and we want to do it on the flank where they don't have the king. If we try to do it on this side of the board, that's not going to work because their king is just simply too close and they can stop us. All right, next up is this position, which is also a very important one to know. This is known as the trebuchet position. if I pronounce that correctly. It is basically a position where we both have a pawn and the pawns are facing off with each other. We want to move up, they want to move down, but the pawns are clearly blocking each other. And we also both have a king very close by, basically straight next to the pawns in this position. Our king is trying to grab that pawn and their king is trying to grab this pawn because black wants to push here and white wants to push there. Okay. The main thing to remember for a trebuchet position is that the player who has to make the move in this exact position, that is the player who is going to lose. Why is that? Well, it is black to move here. Black cannot go up because, well, the pawn is guarding this. So black needs to go to, well, one of these squares or they need to completely abandon everything. But if they go to one of these squares, we just take the pawn and then we just simply have a pawn that's running up the board. There is nothing they can do. So they don't want to be the one to make a move. If they need to make a move, they won't be winning this. So important for this trebuchet position, if you see something like this happening, if you see two locked pawns and the kings are rushing closer, remember that you will probably reach this position and you want it to be their turn when you reach this position. And we are going to see more examples of this. First of all, this is a different position. This is not a trebuchet position. Why is this not a trebuchet position? Because the king is not here. The trebuchet doesn't mean just the pawns being locked up. The trebuchet means that we have the pawns locked up. Our king is trying to take their pawn and their king is trying to take our pawn. That is the trebuchet position. So this is not a trebuchet. It is black to move. It is white to move, actually. It is white to move, but it doesn't even matter because black is going to be able to grab the opposition. They stand in front of the king. They shield us. So this is yet another example of how black can keep a draw if they know the technique, which is move backwards, stand in front of the king, hide in front of the pawn, and then achieve a draw. So a lot of positions look like trebuchet positions, but they are not always trebuchet positions. This is another one. It looks like it, but again, it's no trebuchet. The trebuchet would be if the king is here. This is a different type of position. This time we are winning. Why are we winning? Because of the positioning of our pawn. We have seen this before. Black has the opposition, but very, very important, we can move our pawn to the 6th rank. And if you can move your pawn to the 6th rank, it does not matter if the opponent has the opposition in this particular position, as we will be able to promote anyways. So remember this, that the trebuchet, if you see this, you might be getting a trebuchet position, but you need to understand that it is only a trebuchet when both kings are also in that exact placement that we looked at, and that you don't want to be the first to reach it. So this is really the sneakiest one, the most difficult one. This is where you can really use this rule to your advantage to secure some endgame wins, maybe in positions where you should lose. So it looks like a lot is going on, but basically we grab a pawn, they grab a pawn, and this is like the exact moment where we know that we will be playing for a trebuchet, because the pawns are locked, both kings are rushing, they want to grab the other one's pawn. So remember our lesson. We play king g5 because we want to go closer to the pawn, and a lot of players, so many players, they would play king d4, which is a huge blunder. It immediately throws away the game and white is winning. With a trebuchet, you actually don't want to be the first one to place his king there, because now white does this move. And look at this, we have the trebuchet, which is the two pawns are locked up. The two kings are both trying to capture the other one's pawn, but who has to make the move here? It is black who needs to make the move. And remember, the person who needs to move is the one that's going to lose. They move the king, we take, and then we will be able to just simply rush it up the board. So if black plays king to d4, they are losing. So what should black do? Well, they shouldn't go d4. They should go d3. If they go to d3, they attack the pawn. And since they attack the pawn, we need to defend it. And we only have one move that defends it, which is f5. But now they create a trebuchet position. It's exactly the same, but this time the moves have been switched. Now it is white to move. White has to let go, and after white lets go, black is taking the pawn, and then black will be rushing this of course, down the board to this side of the board, and black is going to win. All right. Here we have the example, but basically we covered this before. This is what I meant with the square of the pawn. How do I know if this pawn is going to promote? Well, I can push it, and then I just do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I ask myself, can they step into the square? Yes. If they can step into the square, we are not winning. I actually had an example for this, but I felt like we needed it a little bit earlier. All right, next position. This is getting more and more intense. We now have 3 pawns and a lot of things are going on at the same time. First of all, I hope you recognize this. Black has frozen pawns. We were able in this example to freeze their pawns, to basically use 1 pawn to stop 2 pawns. That's a very important strategy in pawn endgames, which means that now we just have a 2 versus 1 that we can use here. And the key principle that I'm trying to teach here is what is known as creating an outside passed pawn. What does that mean? I'll show you. This is a passed pawn, and we also call this an outside passed pawn because it's on this side of the board. It's being pushed here, far away from the action, so that we can distract their king to stop the pawn, and then we will be able to promote. So we have seen this before, like if the king stays here for a while, we will push, we will go grab all of this, and we just promote. So what they can try is they can try to push, and I hope you remember one of the most important chess rules that many people forget about, en passant. The only way for white to win this is to grab en passant and then also promote after pushing it. And basically, again, we are distracting that king, we are distracting the king here, and then we are going to use this pawn to promote. If we don't take this en passant, if we do whatever else, it's actually a draw, because now we have to go chase the pawn, and then they take this, and this position is a drawn endgame. All right. We have another one, very, very important. First of all, recognize what's going on here. We just covered this only a minute or 3 ago. We have a trebuchet position. Remember, in a trebuchet position, the player that needs to make the move is the player that is going to lose. But we still have some pawn moves left. And now I will teach you the concept of using a reserve tempi, basically wasting a move so that you can win the game. If we play b4, they play b5, and it is white to move in a trebuchet position. Remember, the player who has to make the move is the player that is going to lose. We will need to let go of the pawn, they will take the pawn, and then they are going to just simply promote this pawn and 3 moves. So how can we make it so that black has to make a move in this position? Well, we have this big advantage, which is that in an endgame, if your pawn is still on the second rank, on the beginning rank, it is oftentimes useful, instead of pushing it twice, to still just push it 1 square. Because by pushing it 1 square, we are shifting the entire game. We are wasting a move, so that we get to this exact same position that we had before, but we did it by wasting a move. And now we have a trebuchet, but in this trebuchet, it is black to move. Black needs to move, and then after they move, wow, look at what happened. This pawn is free, and this pawn is going to promote. So this is how we can win that trebuchet position. All right. Next up, we are going to have a look here at what to do when we have doubled isolated pawns, which is something that can definitely happen in your game as well. When we have double isolated pawns, this is actually always very easy to win if you know what to do, which is that we are just going to move up the board and use the king and the pawn. And usually this type of endgame would be a draw. We have seen this before. This would be a draw because they are going to stand in front of the pawn, and if we do this, that's a stalemate. We have seen this exact position before. Our king is behind the pawn, and as we are behind the pawn, we cannot make any progress and we cannot win this endgame. But we have this big advantage. We have 1 more pawn. We can just waste a move. We can waste a move. We can do g3. We could do g4. And by wasting a move, we force them to move sideways. We go in, and then eventually we are going to promote to a queen. By the way, best thing to do when you have doubled pawns is barely use them. Because if I had done the exact same thing, moving my pawn twice, the things would look very different. Because making a queen would suddenly be a stalemate again, a stalemate. Because the queen covers this and the pawn covers that final square. So when you have doubled pawns, remember, just keep one at the back and use it to go up one move to waste time. How can this game go wrong? I will show you. Let's say we do all of this that we were just doing, but then we decide, let's just move both pawns at the same time. Why not? Let's just keep moving both pawns. And many players would do this. Let's just move both pawns and let's just keep moving both pawns. Well, we get to this position. And now if we go here, that's a stalemate. If we push the pawn, that's a stalemate. If we abandon the pawn, that's going to be a drawn endgame as we don't have the king in front of the pawn. So remember, it's not because you have the doubled pawns that you should move both of them. Move the one in front, leave the one in the back at home, and then maybe move it up one square if necessary to pass the turn back to the opponent so that you can win that endgame. All right, another very common endgame is when you have connected pawns. When you have connected pawns, that means we have two pawns that can both be pushed up the board and they are connected. They are protecting each other. And this is basically always a win. Why is this a win? Because black cannot capture the pawn at the back. If they capture the pawn at the back, well, the pawn that's in front is just going to move up the board. So if you have this position, you can rest assured you are winning this because black cannot capture that pawn, which means we have the time to bring the king closer. If they move too far away, this one moves up the board. And if they stay close, well, we just bring the king closer again. And then eventually we can start using the pawns and we are going to be able to promote. So connected passed pawns are probably one of the best things that you can get. What about split pawns? Well, when you have split pawns, it depends a little bit how far up the board are the pawns and what files are the pawns on. In general, split pawns are also good because, well, if the king tries to stop this one, the other one is just going to promote and they cannot capture it because this one is way too close to promotion. So they would need to, well, go closer again because they want to stop the pawn. Important that we don't just start pushing because, of course, I hope you know, the pawns cannot promote themselves. We always need the king. So basically, we just got the king closer. We get the king closer. And again, every time they try to win one of them, you can actually push up the other pawn. Bring the king closer, and then we are winning this. Even if we lose one of them, we are going to be winning this as long as we put the king in the right square to do the checkmate. So, I mean, so many things are possible. Actually, we can also keep creating this position. And then if they go here, we could actually move the pawn and then promote. This only works because they were really chasing our pawns with the king. If they don't, we really do need to get our king closer. All right, now we have again split pawns, but there are two files in between. In general, the more files in between your split pawns, the better, because really if they go after one, well, the other one is just gone and that one is going to promote. So that's good. If there were like 3 files, 4 files, 5 files in between, that's even better. There is one exception, which is that when you have a rook pawn, remember we talked about this before, rook pawns are very drawish. So if we have a rook pawn, we can actually get a drawn position. What's going to happen? Well, either they can take the rook pawn, and then here they can get in front of our pawn, which means that we won't be able to promote this. And what can sometimes also happen, in this particular case, it actually wouldn't be possible, but I'm going to try to show it, is that they just win that pawn, and then they get the king to the corner, and then they can also secure a draw. So that is something that you need to watch out with. When you have rook pawns, remember, as always, it is more drawish. Yeah, this is an example of 3 files in between, but I hope it's obvious that the more files in between, yeah, the less chances they have, because basically we just push up the board. All right, we are getting to even more interesting stuff here. The next thing that we need to talk about is a pawn breakthrough. How can you make a pawn breakthrough? Oftentimes you will have an endgame where you will need to sacrifice a pawn in order to create a possibility for another pawn to promote. This is going to be an example of this. White to move, and we can actually win the game if we play the move g5. g5 gives away a pawn, But by giving away a pawn, the other pawn is getting closer to promotion. And this is a very important concept to understand. The further up the board this happens, the better, because we are very close to promotion. You don't want to do a trick like this when the pawns are literally at home base, because your opponent would be first. And that's important. Who will promote first? Well, we have the queen first, and then we are in time to actually check the king, and then pick up the pawn, and then we will look in a moment at why this is a winning endgame. All right, this is another very important pawn breakthrough to know. I think, yeah, black wins this one. I think it's black to move. Black can actually promote here. They can promote. Black can push a pawn, and one of these pawn pushes wins the game. If you have never seen this, this will look very strange, but there is a way to promote. The answer is that you want to start with the middle pawn. That is the way to have a breakthrough. You want to play the middle pawn. Let's say that they play pawn takes. Of course, we don't just want to start trading everything, because if we start trading everything, we end up with nothing, and white will actually be winning. So you always play the central pawn, and then by taking here, white has created a problem. Black can play the incredible move pawn to h3. Pawn to c3, sorry, pawn to c3. Pawn to c3 attacks this pawn, and if white takes, this one is gone, because we just removed the defender. The defender is gone, and we can promote. So this is a position where you can sacrifice 2 pawns, and yes, even though white has 3 pawns or 4 pawns, that doesn't matter. The queen is so strong, the queen will pick up all of the pawns. So the trick is push the central pawn, and then it depends. Let's say this happens, then it's a3. We play a3. We are threatening to just take and promote. And if white takes that, we push and 2 more squares, and we have a queen. So that is a very important pawn breakthrough. Now it's the exact same position, but it's white to move, and it's the same thing. We push, and then we can take. And here, there is no breakthrough, but we have seen this before. We have this pawn that is distracting the enemy king, and then we can go up, and we can go and pick up those pawns. So that also works. All right, we have actually already covered so much. I think we are almost done with the king and pawn endgames. This is one of the things that a lot of people struggle with understanding, so I will try to explain it slowly and clearly, so hopefully you understand this for future games. Which is that sometimes we will need to waste a move with our king in order to make progress and in order to be able to win the game. And that is called triangulation. So we are going to have a look at this. And this particular position, we can easily win this. Let's say black goes here and we go up the board. Well, again, we are creating this barrier, and our pawns are also taking away these 2 squares. So black has to move the king. We can win the pawn, and after we win the pawn, we will be able to eventually do this. And we have seen this before. This is that frozen pawn, not a frozen pawns example, that passed pawn example we looked at, where we can push the pawn and then just use the king to grab those and then promote. So this endgame is a very easy win if we can reach this position. If we can reach this position, we will win that pawn, and after we win the pawn, we are going to win the game. Well, if this is our situation here, and we move the king up, and they go here, we are losing. We are suddenly losing. Yes, it's the exact same position, but it is white to make a move. It is white to make a move. Black has the opposition. So white needs to make a move, and now black is infiltrating, and black is pushing the pawn, and suddenly we are in so much trouble, and black will be able to make a queen. So remember, yes, we do want to get this position. We do want to achieve this position, but we want it to be their turn. And this is where triangulation, this is like the most basic example I can give you of triangulation. Instead of going there immediately and having black take the opposition, we need to waste a move, which we can do by playing king f2, which sounds very strange. We are going to create a mini triangle with the king. We are going to step sideways and then diagonally. You could also step sideways here and then diagonally. It doesn't matter in this example. Let's say black goes in. Well, now we play king e3, and this is what we just looked at. We will be able to win that pawn. So triangulation. And if black wants to do something else, it actually doesn't matter because they will just be too slow and we will grab the pawn anyways and we are going to promote. So triangulation is important for when you want to reach a specific position like this one, but you want to reach it with it being your opponent's move, and then you can use triangulation to basically burn the whole move and then pass the turn back to the opponent. All right, now it is time for some piece versus pawn endgames. These are also very, very common. So first of all, who is going to win here? No one. No one is going to win. Why? White can never deliver a checkmate with just a bishop. Well, actually, that's not true. We could actually deliver a checkmate with just a bishop if the opponent really, really messes up. And black will never be able to promote, because if black promotes, well, we just take that with the bishop. And even if they use the king to support it, we just take that with the bishop. And basically no one should be winning this game. That's what I was about to say. Why is it still possible for white to technically win? Well, there is one situation which could happen, which is not this. This would be a stalemate. But basically, the black king can trap himself in the corner with his pawn. And this is actually a neat trick to know. I have used this in many games, actually, where your opponent is just pushing the pawn. They think it's going to be an easy draw, but you just let them get stuck in the corner, and then you do this checkmate. This is not something that you can force. If they are smart, they will just abandon the pawn, and it's going to be a draw. But if they don't know what they are doing, then they might crawl into the corner, and then they can actually get mated. A king in the corner is always a simple target for a checkmate. All right, next example. Black is trying to promote this pawn. They only need to make 2 more moves. We are white. We have this knight. We are trying to use the knight to stop the pawn, and our king is in the corner. Okay, how are we going to try to stop this pawn? Well, it's very simple. We will just need to sacrifice that knight for the pawn. So what I am doing is we play this check, and by playing this check, we control the next square, and if they push, we just take it. And that is immediately a draw, because there is no way to checkmate this. There is a funny sequence that you need to remember here, which is that if they try to attack your knight, you need to go stand in front of the pawn. If they attack your knight, you give the check again. And basically you keep repeating this. You can just keep repeating those moves. And if they don't attack your knight, well, we can just use the king and they cannot make progress. And if they attack the knight again, we go here. So basically you can just keep doing this with the knight. Just keep jumping around. They will never be able to make progress. All right. You do need to watch out, of course, with a knight. I mean, a bishop is very fast. In like 2 moves, it can reach any square on the board. But the knight, well, the knight is slow. And if the pawn is very far away, you will not be able to do anything, and you are going to end up losing your knight and also losing the game. So if you see that you are going to get that knight versus king endgame, be careful, because knight versus pawn endgame, be careful, because you need your knight to be close. There is also a way to checkmate with a knight, which is actually very similar to what we just looked at, which is that if the opponent's king is in the corner, we can actually force them into losing the game. Which is that at some point we can place this move, knight to c1, taking away the options from the king. So the king has no more legal moves. They need to push the pawn, and then we can deliver a checkmate with the knight on b3. Again, can you force this? Well, in this position, yes, it was forced. But if your opponent is smart, they are just not going to put the king in the corner, and then you won't have this checkmate. But it is still available, and it's good to know, because if you know those checkmates, you can really save some positions basically and get extra wins where you shouldn't even have a win. All right, now we are going to have a look at rook versus pawn, and it looks like a rook is so incredibly strong that we should win this. Yes, but we have to play it correctly. And what you want to do if you have a rook versus pawn situation, we are playing black in this example, is you want to cut off the king from its pawn. You want to cut off the king from the pawn, which basically prevents them from making progress. And if they move the pawn up, we can just attack it, and then eventually we will be able to just win it. And it's as simple as that. But even though I say it's simple, I would still see people messing it up, because if you If you don't pay any attention, I think you could actually reach this type of position, yes, which is when the king and pawn are just working together. This is what I see a lot of people do wrong. Instead of cutting off the king, they say, let me just attack the pawn. Because if I attack the pawn, that must be good, right? No, because if you do this, they just connect the two, and we cannot take it. And they are going to be able to eventually force us to sacrifice the rook for the pawn, because they will keep doing this. They will keep making progress. And then eventually they could be able to promote if we don't pay any attention, as I just did, or we would need to stop that promotion, and then basically eventually, yeah, we will get this type of position. I mean, a lot of things are possible here, many checks, a lot of things can happen, but we could get this position. Rook gives a check, pawn promotes, rook needs to sacrifice itself. So remember, in this endgame, your goal is to just cut off the king, and as long as you do that, that should be easy enough. Sometimes you just don't have the possibility to cut off the king because, well, it's already too far up the board, or they are already connected. And then it's exactly as we just looked at. This happens, and then they will be able to secure a draw. So that's the key lesson to remember for when you have a rook versus a pawn. Cut off the king from the pawn, and then you will be winning. All right. Now it is time to have a look at queen versus pawn, which is also a very common endgame. We have a pawn race. We manage to promote first. We get a queen, but are we actually going to win that endgame? Well, it's going to depend on where the pawn is placed and also on your technique. So we are going to cover lots and lots of these queen versus pawn endgames. All right. So queen versus pawn. There are a couple of things you need to know. It basically depends on three factors. I was going to say two, but really three factors. First of all, it depends on the file where the pawn is placed. Right now, it's placed on a central file. Those are the red ones. Then you have the bishop files. We have the knight files. And then we also have the rook files. So these colors matter. Depending on where the pawn is, on which file it is, the endgame result can be different. And it also depends on how close the pawn is to achieving that final square. Like black, of course, is trying to go down, in case that wasn't clear. Black is trying to go down the board. Black is not trying to go up the board. That would be an easy win for us. Black is trying to go down. And it depends so on which file the pawn is, and also how close is the pawn to actually promoting. All right. If the pawn is on the 6th rank here, it's a central pawn on the 6th rank. This is actually very easy, because as long as you can place your queen on the promotion square, you are winning. You are winning because they can never make any progress. They will never be able to put the pawn to promotion as long as your queen is there. Eventually you will win the pawn and you will also win the game. Okay, our next examples are going to be a little bit more interesting, because now white will really need to play very good moves to be able to still win the game. So what has changed? Black is still trying to promote here. They are basically one square away from promotion. And now, as I said, it starts to depend on which, I don't know which colors I used, but probably this will be okay. Yeah, it's going to depend on which file the pawn is on. So first off, we are going to look at the central files, the D file and the E file, the red files in this case. This is winning for white, but only if you know the right technique. So obviously, we cannot afford black to make a queen. If black makes a queen, then it's not good for us. So we need to make that impossible. Maybe we need to give them a check, for example. And after this check, if they step in front of the pawn, that's just one example, that's good. We can make some progress with the queen. And this is what we want. We want to start by leading with the queen. Okay. And here I will teach you a very important sequence that you will need to remember. So black is trying to push this pawn to promote. We make that impossible by pinning. First step. Black is trying to use this move so that they can unpin, so that they can promote. And now you need to know this sequence. We play queen to c4, which is a check. And after this check, what we are trying to do is we are trying to get them to step in front of their pawn. And if they step in front of their pawn, we can bring the king closer and we are going to win. So remember, your goal is to stop them from promotion, but the goal is not to just keep repeating endlessly this king up, queen down. No. That's not what we do. We want to, as I did in the example, give them the check and force them to step in front of their pawn. And if they step in front of their pawn, that is going to be very easy. We will bring the king closer and I will show you how we can win that. If they don't step in front of the pawn, if they go sideways, we will still be able to force them to step in front of the pawn. Check with the queen, which is also a fork. So if they abandon the pawn, they are losing because they are stuck in between these two squares, and this is the very basic king and queen, queen's kiss checkmate that we looked at very at the beginning of this video. So they have to go here, and then we play queen to c3 with a check. And now they only have one option, which is to step in front of the pawn. Again, if they go here, they would be losing the pawn. So this is really the sequence to remember. This checking of the king while also attacking the pawn, forcing them in front of it so that we can win. And we are going to repeat this a couple of times. If they are in front of the pawn, we just bring the king closer and then we repeat this. A check. Oh, they go away. Another check. All right. Remember what move did we have to make? Queen e3, because we want them in front of the pawn. And then we come closer. And we basically repeat this. Now it's another example. Pin from the side. Check up the board. Okay, they step in front of it. If they didn't, it would be this sequence again. And basically we want them to be stuck in front of the pawn. All right. And all we are going to do is just keep repeating this, and we always get one move where we can use the king until we get the king close enough that we can just simply do this, which is capture the pawn and then also deliver a checkmate with the queen's kiss checkmate, as we have seen before. All right, so that's the very basic principle. If this was too complex, rewatch it if necessary, because if you don't understand this, you won't understand the next 15 minutes, probably. Okay. Now we have another example. It's again a central pawn, but this time our king is closer, and basically the closer our king is in this situation, the easier it is going to be. But we need to watch out for one simple trick, which is again that they might try to set up a stalemate. Like in this particular position, this would be a stalemate because the queen is taking away these squares and then the king is taking away that final square. So always watch out. If they give you the pawn for free, double check that you are not just playing for a stalemate. So what do we actually need to do? There is a very interesting trick here, and if you don't know it, you are not going to be able to win this game. Sometimes you will need to let your opponent promote to a queen, but only if your king is close enough. So we are going to play the move king to g1. King to g1. And if the pawn promotes, queen f2 is a checkmate. It's a checkmate. And if the pawn promotes to a knight, which would probably be the more annoying thing that they could do, we are also going to win, as we have already covered how to win against a knight earlier in this video. So if your king is very close from the beginning, or in the wrong position after you moved closer, you might need to let them promote to then checkmate on the next move. And that's a very important theme in these exercises and in these examples, that if you don't know it, it might be difficult for you to win these games. Okay, now we are going to stay away, I think, from central pawns, and we are going to look into the other examples. First one being the rook pawn. So remember what I said before, rook pawns in general are more drawish by nature. This one is still winning because, well, the pawn is 2 squares away from promotion, and we have covered this before. If the pawn is 2 squares away from promotion, that's easier for us. There are many ways to win this. Basically gives lots and lots of checks, and then eventually achieve something like this. King has to abandon the pawn and we win. There's nothing really complicated. Even if you don't know any technique, you can win this if the pawn is 2 squares away from promotion. Now this pawn is 1 square away from promotion. We are no longer winning this. It's one of those annoying rook pawn examples. Check with the queen. Check with the queen, but what's happening? Like, they keep staying very close to that promotion square, so we cannot make any progress. Check with the queen, and what they will do is they will just hide in front of their pawn. But remember, in the past, whenever they were hiding in front of their pawn, that was amazing for us because we would just bring the king closer. While in this position, if we can make them hide in front of the pawn, we cannot bring the king closer because that's a stalemate. This king is stuck, it has no squares, and the pawn is also stuck. It cannot promote. Yeah, the pawn is of course going down, in case that wasn't clear. So the pawn cannot move anywhere, the king is stuck, so this is another stalemate. As we saw, it happens if the pawn is 1 square away from promotion. If it's 2 squares away from promotion, it doesn't happen. And there is one more very advanced thing that I need to show you. We can actually, this position, we can actually win this. Of course, if we do this move with the queen, that's another stalemate. Again, pawn is trying to go down the board, in case that's not clear. That's a stalemate. If we start giving random checks, yeah, we won't make any progress. We have seen this before. This is going to be a stalemate. But there is one way how we can still win this. If the king is close enough, we can win this. So we need to get the king closer, and there's like a genius thing that we can do. King g6. King g6, block the queen. They go here. King f5, the king is getting closer with a check. King f1, and now we can actually win this. We can win this because we will be close enough with the king. And this is another amazing, amazing example. We need to play the move king to f4. Again, allowing them to promote and then just play king to g3. This looks crazy, but this works because this queen cannot do anything. How is it going to check our king? If it checks our king, it's lost. And it doesn't have any checking squares. None of those squares work. So, yeah, and if they go somewhere else, well, that would actually be queen blunder as well. If they go somewhere else, there's just the queen's kiss checkmate, as we have seen before. So remember, if you have a difficult position, sometimes you might need to let them promote, only if your king is close enough, so that you can then checkmate 1 or 2 moves after they promote. All right, next up, we have already covered the central pawns. Remember, the central pawns, you always win. We have also covered the rook pawns. The rook pawns, if it's on the, well, 1 square away from promotion, you need to get your king close and let them promote, otherwise you are not winning. Now we need to talk about the bishop pawn. And the bishop pawn is very annoying. The bishop pawn is very annoying. This is a drawn position. We can make progress, all is good and well, but at this very moment, where usually we would want them to step in front of the pawn so we can bring the king closer, what they can literally do is they can just go stand in the corner. They can just go stand in the corner and they are saying, look, go ahead and take my pawn. Because after you take the pawn, that is a stalemate because the king is stuck. And if we shift everything 1 file to the right, that's actually winning for us because they would be going back and forth. So a bishop pawn is incredibly drawish as they can just go hide in the corner. The only example that works is again when the king is very, very close. If our king is incredibly close, as is the case here, we can just play this strange move, let them promote again, and after they promote, this is going to be checkmate. Which move do we play? There are actually multiple possible moves. Queen a4, check, and queen a2 with a checkmate. So remember, with the rook pawn and the bishop pawn, you need your king to be close and you need to let them promote in order to be able to then checkmate them later. All right. And we actually didn't cover the knight pawn, I see so far, but the knight pawn works the exact same way as the central pawns, which is just that you always win if the pawn is on like b2 or g2. Now, next question. What if the opponent has multiple pawns left and they are close to promotion? What's going to happen then? Well, first of all, we have split pawns. We have 2 pawns. They are split. They are not connected. They are split from each other. And also they are 2 squares away from promotion. So this is very good for us. They are split. We can give a check. We can win one of them. Basically, the opponent has to decide, do I want to keep a central pawn? Do I want to keep a knight pawn? But it doesn't matter. We pick up one of them. And we have seen this before. Since there are still 2 squares to go for them, they are never winning this. We are just going to bring the king closer and then eventually win the pawn and then also eventually checkmate. So split pawns here on the 3rd rank or the 6th rank, not a problem. Now we are going to have these 2 split pawns, and this is actually a problem. Why is it if we just shift this that suddenly black has a drawn position? Well, it is something we have seen before. The thing is that if black is very smart, they will hold on to their bishop pawn. Yes, they will hold on to the bishop pawn because they understand that if they hold on to the bishop pawn, they can set up this position, which is just the same stalemate draw that we have seen before. So the thing to remember, as always, as endgames get more and more complex, is that you need to understand your basics. And if you understand that the bishop pawn can secure you a draw, you can, in this position, give up your other pawn, keep your bishop pawn, and then secure a draw. This is another example. Again, they have a bishop pawn and a central pawn, but this time our king is very, very close by. And since our king is very close by, everything gets easier and we can literally pick up all of the pawns and do a checkmate. In general, the closer your king, the easier it is going to be. Now we have connected pawns, pawns that are supporting each other, even more annoying for us to deal with, as sometimes we cannot even win a pawn as they will be protecting each other. This one is also an example where we win, and we win just simply because we can place the queen here, as we have seen before. If we can get the queen close and they have so many squares left to push, that's very easy. We have checks, we bring the king closer, and it basically is going to take white way too many, black way too many moves to promote, and white will always be able to bring the king closer. So another rule is that the further they still have to push, like the more squares they still have to push to, the easier it's going to be. The reason that I go faster for these is because there is no one right sequence. Like, this wins the game, but this wins the game, like everything wins the game. It's just that these pawns need to make too many moves, and we will be able to win them as long as we use both the king and the queen together. If we just use the queen and we keep making, well, that would be horrible, and we keep making random moves with the queen and we keep letting them push and we don't do anything, well, yes, they are going to promote. But as long as you use your king and your queen combined, you will be fine. So remember in those positions that you do want to use your king as well. This is an annoying example where black will actually be able to secure a draw because the pawns are connected and they are incredibly close to promotion. So basically black can do this. They have two, okay, that was a mouse flip. They have two pawns that can promote. They just say, look, I will promote one of these. Doesn't matter. If you take one, I'm promoting the other. And that is a draw. So if there are connected pawns very close to promotion, there is nothing we can do about that. Okay, and now it is time for the final section of our endgames, which is going to be our rook endgames. Rook endgames are often seen as difficult, but I'm going to just teach you the very basics because really the basics is all you need for most people to achieve like 2100, 2200 rating online and still be okay. All right, let's slow down a little bit and talk through this. So, white has an extra pawn, and that is very typical in rook endgames. If like no one has an extra pawn, of course, there's nothing going on. But if one person has an extra pawn, then we need to be careful because, well, you could win with an extra pawn. Okay, so white has this extra pawn, and we are literally one square away from promotion. But we cannot promote. We cannot promote because our king is blocking the pawn, and our king can actually not leave from in front of the pawn. We wouldn't be making any progress. And if we randomly start checking this king everywhere, well, yeah, it's not really going to achieve as much. We won't throw away the position, but we are not really going to achieve much. What we need to do is we will need to be able to get our king away. And there's actually a two-step plan that we need to think about. So first of all, we will need to do what they call building a bridge. We will need to put our rook on the 4th rank number 4, this one. Why do we need to put the rook here? Because this is going to help us to win. Now, we want to move our king, but we don't have a single square. We cannot force this rook away, but we can always check this king and force that king to move. And if that king moves, then we will be able to make progress. By the way, earlier I think I moved here with their king. Well, of course, if they move there, it's quite easy. You could just go here. There are no checks, and like the next move we are promoting. So that's just a big mistake. If they do this, it's just a king and rook versus king endgame. So we can basically, after we go to the 4th rank, check them and force them away. And by forcing them away, we create an escaping square for the king. But now this rook is going to start checking us. And of course, if we crawl in front of the pawn again, we are not making any progress. So we need to go this way. But the rook checks us again. And it's annoying because if we go here or back there, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. So it's quite annoying. But we have a simple way to fix this. We can just step sideways. Doesn't even matter which side. The rook checks us and now we come forward. The rook checks us, but we can block with our rook, and that is why we needed the rook on the 4th rank, because if the rook is not on the 4th rank, then this is not possible. Now we can block with the rook, and then eventually we are going to promote just in time. And I will actually show you. Let's say that I try to do that exact same example here. That exact same example, but we don't put a rook on the 4th rank. We get here, we get checked, but we cannot block. We cannot block. And since we cannot block, well, if we come closer, we lose the pawn. And if we go back to the pawn, we can get checked over and over again. That's why we need the rook on the 4th rank. This is known as the Lucena position or also the 4th rank defense. This is another example of this. This one is actually a little bit easier. Not super important, honestly, but basically, sometimes there are also other ways to promote, which could be this, which is that you create this shelter for your king and then you try to promote. But I would really recommend if you just remember that one Lucena position, I think that's going to be more than enough. All right, how do we actually reach that position? Well, now that we know that we can win it, the next step is just achieving that position. So push the pawn. And push the king. It's okay. We use the pawn. We use the king in front of the pawn. No worries at all. We want to achieve this position because this is the start of our Lucena position. This is the start of building the bridge. So what is the next move that we should play? Rook to the 4th rank. Of course, rook to the 4th rank. That is the move we need. What is the next thing we need to do? Well, actually, let me do it this way. What is the next thing we need to do? Check their king. Check their king. Again, if they go here, that's very easy. We are just promoting. And if they go sideways, well, now we can get away. Check, 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 and the rook blocks. And then we are just in time to promote the pawn. Very, very important. All right. And then I think we have one more Lucena position, if I am correct, which is a little bit more difficult. But basically, if you understand the basics, you will find this. What do we need to do? We need to get the pawn up the board. And we need to get our king in front of it, as we have seen before. You can, even if you want, use your rook to shield, so that build a cage, basically, so that their king cannot get closer. It's all fine. We just need to make progress. But sometimes this is annoying because like the rook can start checking you from the side and the rook can just keep checking you from the side, which can be annoying. But what you can do eventually is that you can always just attack the rook. And after you attack the rook, we can attack the rook again. And by attacking the rook twice in a row, we can make them waste a move, which is going to help us to push. So just know that this is winnable. But sometimes, yes, it's very annoying. They can give you many, many checks. But if they give you checks, just go attack their rook. We achieve this. And then this is a typical example of Lucena. And actually not even a typical example of Lucena. It's a very basic example where we are just going to be able to promote even. There's nothing to worry about there. All right. So that was the Lucena position. If that didn't make too much sense, or if you think I need to rewatch it, just rewatch it. And as I said, I will also link you with some exercises. Next up is that we want to look at this, which is known as the 3rd rank defense or the Philidor position. I will actually flip it. I think that's going to make more sense for this example. So we are black and white is trying to promote this pawn. It's similar to what we looked at before. White has the extra pawn and they're trying to promote. And we can stop their promotion if we can prevent that Lucena position from happening, the one that we just looked at. How can we prevent that from happening? Well, we need to make sure that our king is in front of the pawn, not their king, but our king. And there is a very simple rule that you can remember here, which is that all we need to do is we need to put the rook on the third rank. That is why this is called the third rank defense. If we put the rook on the third rank and we have our king on the back rank in front of their pawn, they are trying to promote this way, then this is a draw. Why is this a draw? Well, first of all, if they check us, no worries. We can literally do this all day. We can just go back and forth all day between these two squares. So at some point, they will get tired of this and they will push the pawn. The moment that they push the pawn to the third rank, we immediately go all the way to the back. All the way to the back, and now we are winning this. Again, if they give us checks, we can do this all day. We are just going to move the king back and forth. So at some point they will say, okay, it's time to get my king closer. But now that they get their king closer, we can literally give them an endless amount of checks. Just check, check, check. Keep giving them a check. And then we just go somewhere else. And the rook and pawn by themselves can never force a promotion. And this is why this is a draw. I mean, if they push the pawn, we take the rook, and then we take the queen. And if they try to get closer again, we can literally repeat what we have done before. And at some point, we are just going to give them an endless amount of checks again, and they won't make any progress. So remember, just put your rook on the third rank, wait for them to push the pawn, then you go to the end of the board and you just check them forever. All right. This is a good example as well. So now we are playing white this time, and we are trying to promote. And our opponent already has this king there, which is good for them, but they don't yet have the rook on the third rank. So we should try to avoid that position. So what we can actually do is we can go up the board, and if they put the rook here now, that actually doesn't help them because we are going to block. And if they try to go for the endless check, they forgot about something, which is that they are actually mated. This is a back rank checkmate because the king has no squares, the rook has to block, and then this is a checkmate. So sometimes it is possible as white to avoid this if you are fast enough by making the progress with this pawn push, and then they just cannot check us. And if they go here, trying to give us the endless check, the move that we need to remember is check with the rook. They only have one legal move, and the important thing is we can move with a check. And this is crucial, this moving with a check, because now we have achieved the position where their king is no longer in front of the pawn. And remember, this is what we have seen before. This is going to be Lucena position. All right, yes, this is the Lucena. We built the bridge by going to the fourth rank. And then eventually we can promote. There are multiple things actually we can just promote here this way as well. But you could also have a Lucena position depending on how black plays it. All right, and that is this defensive technique that you need to know. And then there is one final lesson that I want to teach you, which is that there will be many more endgames, especially rook and pawn endgames that I am not going to cover in this video. The video would be 10 hours plus, and you won't even see most of those endgames often. But the general principle for rook endgames is that you always, if you have a passed pawn, you want to have your rook behind your pawn. So never play a move like rook to e1 and put your rook in front of your pawn, because this is no longer winning. Because it's just no longer winning because the rook is going to be blocking the pawn. Also, don't start pushing and then you might be in trouble. Like, I think this particular position, we could actually still win this. But the biggest thing to just remember is please go back, put the rook behind the pawn, and now this is okay. Because we have the rook supporting the pawn. And all we need to do now is we need to get our king closer, and we need to rush over with the king. And we need to start attacking that rook so we can force the rook to move, and then we are going to be able to make progress, and we will also be able to win this game eventually. So just remember, if you have something more complicated than what we looked at in this video, put your rook behind the pawn. That is it for this video, and if you are still watching, make sure to subscribe to show that you are grateful for this very long tutorial.